All right. So in front of me is a split ergonomic keyboard known as the Kyria. You can get this keyboard from a little website called splitkb, and this is the fourth revision of the design. One of the main features of this revision is that you can now actually get a trackpad that is attached to the keyboard, and we'll get to that in a bit. But in order to really tell the story of this keyboard, I figured I should also maybe share what it was like to build this thing and also to explain the reasoning of why I was curious to try this board. And that'll also allow me to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of this particular device. So let me just quickly unplug it now and let me just show you some interesting tidbits. This is kind of one of those more hobbyist keyboards, so to say. So this is a keyboard that you're going to have to put together yourself. It doesn't come pre-assembled. You can flip it over to the side and then you can see that there are these plates that you're going to have to screw together. Note that one thing that's really cool is that you don't have to do any soldering. Sometimes for these hobbyist keyboards, you really got to solder every single hot swap socket, and it's certainly a bit intimidating if you've never really done soldering before. But this thing really only requires a screwdriver and maybe a little bit of patience to get the finicky little bits together. But within an hour, you can get this whole thing constructed pretty easy. You get some pretty clear guides as well. Once you've put all the mechanical bits together, you're going to have to flash this device, but the guide also tells you quite clearly which file to click and drag. So definitely no complaints there. The only thing that I do maybe want to mention as far as ease of installation goes is you will notice that this plate on top over here, that is a aluminum plate. And I have found that getting the switches into this thing, that was actually kind of a struggle. I really had to apply force to really get the switching kind of nicely. And you can actually kind of see some of that remaining effect over here. You can see that this switch in the middle over here, that blue switch, that was not entirely easy to push down fully. There's another one over here. And the keys registered just fine, and I was kind of afraid of applying too much force at some point. But my impression is that because maybe it's winter now and I'm in the attic, it was a little bit too cold, and therefore, I think this is speculation, right? But maybe the material doesn't really budge, all sorts of reasons. The reason I bring it up is because I also have the fourth revision of its big brother, the Elora keyboard, which is similar in a lot of ways, also requires no soldering. But this has a top plate made out of a, I don't know exactly what kind of plastic, but some plastic material. And I can just confirm that it was no issue whatsoever on this Elora keyboard, but it was totally a theme on this Kyria. So if I can make a recommendation, don't get the aluminum top plate. Other than that, getting this thing built was pretty easy, and the fact that you can build it yourself also means that you can get it for relatively cheap, especially if you have your own keycaps and if you have your own switches. Now, the main thing that makes version 4 of this keyboard version 4 is the fact that the upgrades are improved. So you can easily install a screen on this side. You can install the same screen on the other side, by the way. But there's also a trackpad available. But basically, the expansion modules, that's the main thing that's been really well upgraded here. And I will say it's a small little detail, but I really like the screen. So this screen, right out of the box, it basically just tells you what layer you're on. And even though the keyboard has LEDs, you cannot really program those LEDs to give you a different color using their base configurator when you switch a layer. But that screen can actually tell you that information. So if I were to hit this button for a layer switch, the screen will just always be able to tell me. So this is symbol layer, this is mouse layer. I would not underestimate how kind of nice it is to have a screen like that around. It's not like I stare at the screen the entire time. I usually just look that way. But it is a cute little addition, and it wasn't really much of a cost. So that is definitely something I'm happy I bought. The other expansion that I got was a trackpad, because that was also kind of the unique selling point. This was the main reason why I wanted to give this keyboard a try. I don't like moving my hands off my keyboard to use a trackpad. The trackpad has also led to some RSI issues for me in the past. So I was just really eager. What is it like to have a trackpad here on your keyboard? Is that going to be super duper useful? And how does that sort of work ergonomically? And there are some pros and cons on that one, actually. So for starters, it is good to just observe that you don't necessarily need the trackpad to move your mouse. The keyboard runs QMK, and QMK has mouse support. So I have this thing on my keyboard. It's a mouse layer. And with it, I can just move my mouse cursor as I press some buttons on the keyboard. And I can also move the mouse to the right place, hit a key that indicates a mouse click. I can move it back. So without using the trackpad, I can already do mouse movement-y stuff. I don't need a trackpad for that. On top of that, there's also the thing that if you consider the position of the trackpad, it is just a small amount of space that you can really use. So really big swipey movements aren't possible, and you really do have to lift your hand and hover it over here in order to sort of use it comfortably. So for me personally, I just noticed that there's a lot of mouse movement that I just prefer to do with the normal keyboard layer. The trackpad, to me at least, has quite a limited use. But there is this one use case for which the trackpad is awesome, and that is when I need to click and drag. Because that is something that I've always found just a little bit annoying to do without a trackpad, because you gotta imagine one hand needs to activate a layer, then this hand can maybe move the mouse, and then, okay, I guess I could have like a button press over here, and then we can do click and drag movements. But just a very quick, okay, those are my mouse buttons now. I can just maybe grab this window over here and sort of just quickly drag it around. That is just kind of nice. It is a use case that I don't have frequently, but when I have it, it is really cool to have around. So I have found this still to be like a net positive just for that one use case. Because that means that the one reason that I would need to reach for a trackpad, that's actually kind of gone now. I should be able to do all of my mouse movement stuff here. Now, in terms of the design aspect, there's like one thing I do maybe want to observe, and that is that I think the thumb cluster actually gets a little bit in the way of the trackpad. If I were to remove these two buttons, for example, you can totally imagine how the trackpad could move down a smidge, and that might actually make it a little bit easier to move your finger kind of here, and maybe that would be a more ideal position for the trackpad. I get design-wise that's also an anti-pattern, because we like having symmetric keyboards, right? And maybe some users don't want to use a trackpad, and then you want to have those two buttons, so I get the design decision, but I do think ergonomically, I can imagine some merit to having a trackpad just a little bit more down. So the trackpad, it has its limited use case, but for that use case, I think it's fine. I guess the next thing that will be good to talk about, though, is the lack of the number row on top. And again, I'm just going to compare it to the Big Brother real quick. This is the Elora version 3, and you can see it's really just the same as this Kyria, but it does come with that extra little row on top. So another reason why I got this keyboard was because I kind of wanted to challenge myself, like, gee, could I teach myself to maybe not use that number row? In theory, you could argue that that's more ergonomic, because by doing so, your fingers will never have to move far away. However, you can also argue there's a slight downside, which is that the only way you're going to get the number row to work elsewhere is you have to introduce shortcuts or layers or stuff like that. So how did I address this? Well, I have home row modifications on by default anyway. So just in summary, I can hold down J, and J will then turn into Shift, basically. And that allows me to capitalize all the letters on this side. Similarly, if I keep K pressed down, that's Command, and then I've got Alt, and then I've got Control, and that's also mirrored. So I've also got access to Shift, Command, Alt, Control on this side. However, there is this one key on the side here that is currently not set to anything. So what I've done is I've set this to be a modifier, sort of home row modifier style, just one to the side, where if this is held down, I'm in the number layer, and then I can type numbers, or I can type the symbols that are attached to those numbers. So also on this side, I can keep that pressed down. Got all my numbers, and I have those symbols on top. It does kind of work. Like, I do just notice that my fingers aren't moving as much anymore, and something about that is just really compelling and comfortable. But it does have this one little upper limit, and that is that you do get lost when you do some keyboard shortcuts. Just to give an example, if I want to start making a recording with this software that I've got, that is Shift Command 2, and just the mental memory of that, okay, Shift Command, oh, and then I got to go to 2. Oh, I should move my thumb here then maybe, and then I can, it's 2 over there. That's just kind of annoying. So if you have elaborate keyboard shortcuts from apps that require the number row, what you are going to end up doing instead is you are just going to assign that as a shortcut key elsewhere. So if I want to make a quick recording, there's just a button, I think it's this thumb button over here, that I can just go ahead and click, and it's just going to start a recording on my behalf. Another alternative is that you can maybe use a macro pad for that, but I will say that that is a use case where you do really need a number row. That one use case notwithstanding, I have found that I can actually kind of teach myself to use the keyboard this way. It's just this one extra use case that you got to train yourself with, and although the typing is still just a little bit slower, I can confirm that this keyboard has gotten me to appreciate the appeal that some of the more hardcore ergonomic keyboard users have when it comes to having less keys. Like having a number row less also means you gotta arch over less, and okay, I do kind of see the appeal of that. I don't know if I want to do that full time, but I can at least acknowledge that it's been a fun exercise granting myself less keys and constraining myself a little bit. There are some ergonomic realizations that took place because of that. Now, having said all of that, there are like a few things that I think are likable about this keyboard, but I do want to mention a few upgrades that I did have to do in order to get this keyboard to work really nice for me. And the main thing that I want to start with is the fact that there are no palm pads for this guy, which I do think is a big swing and a miss. Now, I have these extra palm pads from my other keyboard, and I can stack two of them together on top. And when I do that and put them in a nice place, and I will say it basically alleviates all of my concerns. Like this does kind of work for me. But it would be just so cool if there was just some sort of palm pad and a 3D printed case that I could buy with this extra, just so I get the complete picture. Like that's, I think, the main thing that's currently missing. You can get an upgrade such that you can maybe do some tenting and all that stuff is cool. But the tenting without a palm rest for me just doesn't work. There are people who prefer to type while floating. I can definitely imagine some ergonomic benefits to floating. It's just that for me, I really like to rest my hands because sometimes I got to think, and having a good rest is a thing that I tend to appreciate from a board. So that I do think is missing. That's something you want to maybe buy and get yourself. And another, I think, customization that is maybe good to think about is the switches, and also, in my case, the tilting on the keycaps themselves. So, let's have a look at the design of this keyboard, shall we? What's really cool about this keyboard is that it has some really nice, that is to say, the A, the S, the D, when I put my fingers on the home resting position, I can kind of keep my hand nice and flat. I don't have to sort of curl my hand up as a claw in order to have my fingers straight on the row. Like there's a pretty comfortable resting position right there. You can also see that my thumb over here can move around quite clearly. But what I've done is I've tilted the keycaps on my thumb just a little bit so that when I make the movement on the inside over here, that's just a little bit more comfortable. You can also see that I've done the same thing on the top row over here. By just adding a little bit of an angle and a little bit of a tilt, you should be able to see that from the resting position up, my finger just has to move slightly less. In the long run, these things are just kind of details, but I have noticed that this is just kind of a nice little addition. And another thing that I've also done is I've played around with the keycaps a little bit. So you can see quite clearly that some of the keycaps are just a little bit taller than the other ones. And I've noticed for the pinky, having something that's just a little bit higher over here just makes it a little bit more pronounced that I'm hitting a key over there and not by accident. And for the thumb cluster, there's something very similar happening. But the really nice thing here is that by having a height difference between the keycap here, I can actually hit this button without triggering the button on the underside over there. I think there's a 2mm difference that you're going to need in order to do stuff like that. But this ladder upgrade really makes it such that I have 5 buttons that are really easy to press for each thumb. And that really just opens up a lot of doors. In the base design, I wouldn't know what you would do with the top 2 buttons over here. But with a height difference, it totally starts making sense. A small pro tip if you're going to go down this direction, by the way. What I have done for some of the keys that have a tilt in them that require the angle, I have actually used some switches that come with a little box over here. So you can really see how this is one of those switches where you barely have any wobble. Not every box switch is compatible with a tilted keycap extender. That's like something to keep in the back of your mind. But I have found that if you use these tilting kits, you can get some key wobble, and the main remedy against that is to use a proper box switch. So yeah, that's the Kyria. The one extra thing that comes to mind now that's actually also an upgrade is before you would have a TRRS cable to connect both halves. Nowadays you get a USB-C cable. Effectively, the hardware has been upgraded such that if I were ever to unplug this device by accident, that the risk of short-circuiting is basically gone. With the old audio-like TRRS scales, it was definitely a risk, but like little details like that have been ironed out, so this is definitely a very good upgrade, I would say. As of last week, I think I got the email that you can also get the Elora, so if you're interested in getting the version 4, but with a number row, you can also go for that. I think it's $10 more expensive or something. So yeah, having settled that, can I recommend this board to people? I mean, maybe actually. If you're interested in maybe exploring a more minimal layout and you're maybe willing to investigate some changes to your normal habits by removing the number row on top, then this is certainly not a bad option. Like that is something I'm comfortable saying. It's just that even though I've been using this board for a bit, I just don't know if I prefer a keyboard with a number row. I think I kind of do, but part of me is still kind of curious to give this a go. That's the thing that I don't know for sure yet about keeping this in my rotation. I definitely appreciate the fact that I can just have a mouse nearby, like the Trackpad edition and the screen, and cool stuff to like. It's just that if I were given the option, would I get version 4 of the Elora instead of this if I had the choice? And yeah, I just don't know yet. So yeah, this was the Kyria keyboard.